How dare you ask me to read the rules as written? Oh, Gary Gygax never said that. Oh, sorry. Someone was wrong on the internet. You have found me today, and I'm just waiting to read to you. We're continuing Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, if you haven't already been privy to that. Uh, I've wanted to, over time, vary the streaming I do on my Tuesdays and Thursdays. But I kind of delayed a week, and I'm a little bit behind. I want to finish Frankenstein before Halloween. That doesn't exactly look like it's going to happen, unless through some miracle we get through, well, a lot of chapters real fast. But that is also not the point. The point is to read it at a good pace, a goodly pace, enjoy it, pull from it, chew on it, that sort of stuff. Work through the text, however hard that might be, and just appreciate the aspect of reading. So, with that in mind, let's quickly do a brief recap of where we've been in these past two parts. The book starts with, well, first, I guess, before I get ahead of myself, here's the edition we're reading. We are reading the Penguin Classics edition with this cover. And we will pick up on page 49 on chapter 4. But in this edition, there are two intros or prefaces, one from the author herself and one from P.B. Shelley. At the very beginning, we read her, Mary Shelley's introduction, which was very interesting and fascinating as a sort of context to the book. And then we began the story. And the story starts on a ship to the far north, traveling on this massive epic voyage. This Robert Walton corresponds with his sister in England and talks about his journey, the reasoning behind it, and how he comes across this fellow in his travels out in that far north, being near death. And having nursed him to health, he finds a compelling companionship with him and gets this Victor Frankenstein to regale him with the tale of how he came out to be near death out in the far north, and possibly give some context to the quarry he's chasing. And then, in chapter 1, we jump in and we get Victor's tale. We get his account of things. And in it, it begins with a tale of a great upbringing in which Victor is brought up with loving parents who live well and love well. And in that, he's brought up in a most wholesome household. And eventually, at a certain point, the parents both adopt this Elizabeth from an impoverished house in which she wasn't even a relation. She was just a ward or a charge to a family now in poverty. And so then Victor's mother brings her in. And Victor himself loves her dearly, claims her as his own. There's some interesting language surrounding that relationship that Victor and Elizabeth have. And eventually, before now, his mother dies. And in it, she said before then she says her farewells, and it is a very sad part of the chapter, and it kind of spurs Victor to move on, to go into his studies. And at first he kind of abandons some of his more radicalized studies of the philosophy of nature. And then when he gets to the city, and I forget exactly where that was, Ingolstadt, I think it was. I'm not going to take too much time to correct myself on that. Yeah. But in there, he finds two professors who kind of are his introduction, or kind of, they're his altar point, or his flashpoint. You've got M. Krempe, who derides all the old ways of learning and the old kind of the mysticism of philosophy of nature, and just is like, nah, that stuff sucks. And then you've got this M. Waldman, who kind of encourages this look back at the old classical ways of thinking, and it sparks something new in Victor. And in that, Victor becomes M. Waldman's disciple. And that's where we end chapter 3. And so, I guess before we start, let me just pop up the book here cover so you can kind of see it. I like having the cover here as a sort of guidance, just to kind of, something to look at. So it's not just me doing this the whole time and showing you my shiny forehead. We begin with chapter 4, and we've been reading at a decent pace, but I do plan to, whenever there's a troubling text, a fascinating text, an interesting text, or something I don't know, I will stop. I will look it up. I will figure it out. I will work through it. I do find that kind of an important part of this whole process. I'm not reading this to perform it, although I do try. I do try to put some oomph into it. It's more so that I want to absorb the book, express it, and try to engage with this like verbally in a more external fashion. So this does not replace any audiobook you may read. It's not really meant to do that. It's meant to, if we were together, all of us, anyone who's watching, if we were sitting around a table, I would want to do this exact same thing. This would be my book group. We pick a book, and instead of studying it beforehand and doing preparation, just engage in the material in the moment. And with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, I had been prepared before. I had read it a couple times. This I have never read before. So I'm encountering this for the very first time. So it's all new and all immediate. And I don't have a lot of time to think through it, to dwell on it. And I think there's a kind of an interest and a power there. And then to get in the mood, we got our picture from, what was it, Bernie Wrightson, who did like did art for the Marvel adaptation of Frankenstein. I love how evocative it is. So if you can look that up and see what that deal is there, that's good, some good stuff. But we're about 7 minutes in. I have delayed long enough. Let's get to reading Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, by Mary Shelley. Chapter 4. From this day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, in the most comprehensive sense of the term, became nearly my sole occupation. I read with ardor those works so full of genius and discrimination, which modern inquirers have written on these subjects. I attended the lectures, and cultivated the acquaintance of the men of science of the university, and I found even in M. Krempe a great deal of sound sense and real information, combined, it is true, with a repulsive physiognomy and manners, but not on that account the less valuable. In M. Waldman I found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged by dogmatism, and his instructions were given with an air of frankness and good nature that banished every idea of pedantry. In 1,000 ways he smoothed for me the path of knowledge, and made the most abstruse inquiries clear and facile to my apprehension. Abstruse. We're already starting here. The most abstruse. Is that similar to obtuse? Let's take a look. Abstruse. A-B. Where'd it go? Where the heck did it go? Abstruse. Okay, A-B. Struse. It is. It is simply obscure. Abstruse. A-B-S-T-R-U-S-E. Abstruse. He smoothed for me the path of knowledge, and made the most abstruse inquiries clear and facile to my apprehension. My application was at first fluctuating and uncertain. It gained strength as I proceeded, and soon became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. As I applied so closely, it may be easily conceived that my progress was rapid. My ardor was indeed the astonishment of the students, and my proficiency that of the masters. Professor Krempe often asked me, with a sly smile, how Cornelius Agrippa went on, whilst M. Waldman expressed the most heartfelt exultation in my progress. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was engaged heart and soul in the pursuit of some discoveries which I hoped to make. None but those who have experienced them can conceive of the enticements of science. In other studies you go as far as others have gone before you, and there is nothing more to know. But in the scientific pursuit there is continual food for discovery and wonder, a mind of moderate capacity, which closely pursued one study, must infallibly arrive at great proficiency in that study. And I, who continually sought the attainment of one object of... Okay, let me back up. I'm reading this sentence very poorly. A mind of moderate capacity, which closely pursued one study, must infallibly arrive at great proficiency in that study. And I, who continually sought the attainment of one object of pursuit, and was solely wrapped up in this, improved so rapidly that at the end of 2 years I made some discoveries in that improvement of some chemical instruments, which procured me great esteem and admiration at the university. When I arrived at this point and had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depended on the lessons of any of the professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvements, I thought of returning to my friends and my native town, when an incident happened that protracted my stay. One of the phenomena which had particularly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed, any animal endued with one of the phenomena which had One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life, whence I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered as a mystery. Yet with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries? Pardon, the seat is falling. Let me just... One thing is that if something is hard to read or you struggle with it, that's good. I want that to be seen. Another reason why this isn't an audiobook is that I'm not performing it and I'm not trying to be that... I want to read well, but I'm imperfect. My eyes do not serve me exactly 100%, especially in the morning. So bear with me, and so on. When I had arrived at this point and had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depended on the lessons of any of the professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvements, I thought of returning to my friends in my native town, when an incident happened that protracted my stay. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and, indeed, any animal endued with life. Whence, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered as a mystery. Yet with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries? I resolved these circumstances in my mind, and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. Unless I had been animated by an almost supernatural enthusiasm, my application to this study would have been irksome and almost intolerable. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not ever remember to have trembled at the tale of superstition, or to have feared the apparition of a spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which from being the seat of beauty and strength had become food for the worm. Now I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. My attention was fixed upon every object the most insupportable to the delicacy of human feelings. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeed to the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. I paused, examining and analyzing all the minutiae of causation, as exemplified in the change from life to death, and death to life, until from amidst of this darkness a sudden light broke in upon me, a light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect which it illustrated, I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries toward the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. The astonishment which I had at first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labor, to arrive at once at the summit of my desires was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. But this discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld only the result. What had been the study and desire of the wisest men since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Not that, like a magic scene, it all opened upon me at once. The information I had obtained was of a nature rather to direct my endeavors so soon as I should point them toward the object of my search, than to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead, and found a passage to life, aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. In this book, there are a few different footnote markers, and we're not going to spend any time really seeking those out. But he is making a reference, and I am kind of curious. And I did promise myself I would stop if there was ever something of a curiosity. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead, and found a passage to life, aided only by the one glimmering and ineffectual light. 19. Let's see. Is there something at the end of the chapter? No. Notes. We're on 19. Oh, okay. It's as I thought. From the 1001 Nights, Sinbad the Sailor's Fourth Voyage. Oh, interesting. Okay. So he's referencing Sinbad. Victor, that is. I was like the Arabian who had been buried with the dead, and found a passage to life aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. I see by your eagerness, and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. That's a fascinating thing. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. An interesting caution. When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, with all its intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one such simpler organism, but my imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt of my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to so arduous an undertaking, but I doubted not that I should ultimately succeed. I prepared myself for a multitude of reverses. My operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work be imperfect. Yet, when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and medicine, and science and mechanics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations of future success. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as any argument of its impracticability. Argument of its impracticability. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. As the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved, contrary to my first intention, to make the being of a gigantic stature, that is to say, about 8 feet in height, and proportionably large. After having formed this determination and having spent some months in successfully After having formed this determination and having spent some months in successfully collecting and arranging my materials, I began. No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards, like a hurricane in the first enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might in the process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. These thoughts supported my spirits, while I pursued my undertaking with unremitting ardor. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. Sometimes on the very brink of certainty, I failed, yet still I clung to the hope which the next day or the next hour might realize. One secret which I alone possessed was the hope to which I dedicated myself, and the moon gazed on my midnight labors, while, with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness, I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate lifeless clay? My limbs now tremble and my eyes swim with the remembrance. But then a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. It was indeed but a passing trance that only made me feel with renewed acuteness so soon as, the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate, I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from charnel houses and disturbed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house, and separated from all the other apartments by a gallery and a staircase, I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from their sockets, and attending to the details of my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation, whilst, still urged on by an eagerness which perpetually increased, I brought my work near to conclusion. The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul in one pursuit. It was a most beautiful season. Never did the fields bestow a more plentiful harvest, or the vines yield a more luxuriant vintage, but my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature, and the same feelings which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me also to forget those friends who were so many miles absent, and whom I had not seen for so long a time. I knew my silence disquieted them, and I well remembered the words of my father. I know that while you are pleased with yourself, you will think of us with affection, and we shall hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard my interruption in your correspondence as proof that your other duties are equally neglected. I knew well, therefore, what would be my father's feelings, but I could not tear my thoughts away from my employment, loathsome in itself, but which had taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. I wished, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to my feelings and affection until the great object, which swallowed up my every habit of nature, should be completed. I then thought that my father would be unjust if he ascribed my neglect to vice or faultiness on my part, but I am now convinced that he was justified in conceiving that I should not be altogether free from blame. A human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never allow passion or a transitory desire to disturb his tranquillity. I do not think that the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections, and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix, then that study is certainly unlawful, that is to say, not befitting of the human mind. If this rule were always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquillity of his domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved. Caesar would have spared his country, America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru had not been destroyed. But I forget that I am moralizing in the most interesting part of my tale, and your looks remind me to proceed. My father made no reproach in his letters, and only took notice of my silence, by inquiring into my occupations more particularly than before. Winter, spring, and summer passed away during my labors, but I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves, sight which before always yielded to me supreme delight. So deeply was I engrossed in my occupation. The leaves of that year had withered before my work drew to a close, and now every day showed me more plainly how well I had succeeded. But my enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety, and I appeared rather like one doomed by slavery to toil in the mines, or any other unwholesome trade, than an artist occupied by his favorite employment. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree. The fall of a leaf startled me, and I shunned my fellow creatures, as if I had been guilty of a crime. Sometimes I grew alarmed at the wreck I perceived that I had become. The energy of my purpose alone sustained me. My labors would soon end, and I believed that exercise and amusement would then drive away incipient disease, and I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. Chapter 5. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscle and artery beneath. His hair was of lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast to his watery eyes, that seemed almost the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked so hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now I had finished. The beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber. Unable to compose my mind to sleep, at length lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept, indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with a hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead. My teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaw opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again, endued with animation, could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. Interesting. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others I nearly sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become hell to me, and the change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned, and discovered to my sleepless and aching eyes, the church of Ingolstadt, its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates of the court, which had that night been my asylum, and I issued into the streets, pacing them with quick steps, as if I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt impelled. Is that the? I mean, not simply compelled. I felt impelled. That's not how you spell that. Impelled. To drive, force, or urge someone to do something. I mean, impelled him. I wonder what the difference is. I mean, that's neither here nor there. I continued walking in this manner for some time, endeavoring by my bodily exercise to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Like one on a lonesome road who doth walk in fear and dread, and, having once turned round, walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. That's noted. It's a bit of poetry in there, and notated at the bottom as Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, from the author's footnote. Continuing thus, I came at length opposite to the inn at which various diligences and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused, I knew not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. As it drew nearer, I observed that it was the Swiss diligence. It stopped just where I was standing, and on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who upon seeing me instantly sprung out. "My dear Frankenstein," exclaimed he, "how glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting!" Nothing could equal my delight upon seeing Clerval. His presence brought back to my thoughts of my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand, and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. I felt suddenly, and for the first time during many months, calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, in a most cordial manner, and we walked toward my college. Clerval continued talking for some time about our mutual friends and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ingolstadt. "You may easily believe," said he, "how great was the difficulty to persuade my father that all necessary knowledge was not comprised in the that was not comprised in the noble art of bookkeeping, and indeed I believe I left him incredulous. I left him incredulous to the last, for his constant answer to my unwearied entreaties was the same as that to the Dutch schoolmaster in the Vicar of Wakefield. I have 10,000 florins a year without Greek. I eat heartily without the Greek. But his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of learning, and he has permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge. It gives me the greatest delight to see you, but tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth. Oh, very well, and very happy, only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I mean to lecture you a little upon their account myself, but, my dear Frankenstein, continued he, stopping short and gazing full into my face, I did not before remark how very ill you appear, so thin and pale, and look as if you had been watching for several nights. You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest, as you see, but I sincerely hope, that all these employments are now at an end, and that I am at length free. I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of, and far less allude to, the occurrences of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver, that the creature whom I had left in my apartment might still be there, alive and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him. Entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs, I darted up towards my own room. My hand was already on the lock of the door before I recollected myself. I then paused, and a cold shiver came over me. I threw the door forcibly open, as children are accustomed to do when they expect a spectre to stand in waiting for them on the other side. But nothing appeared. I stepped fearfully in. The apartment was empty, and my bedroom was also freed from its hideous guest. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me, but when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clairville. We ascended We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought breakfast, but I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with excess of sensitiveness, and my pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped all over the chairs, and clapped my hands, and laughed aloud. Clairville at first attributed my unusual spirits to joy on his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw a wildness in my eyes, for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. "My dear Victor," cried he, "what, for God's sake, is the matter? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill you are! What is the cause of all this?" "Do not ask me," cried I, putting my hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. "He can tell. Oh, save me! Oh, save me!" I imagined that the monster seized me. I struggled furiously, and fell down in a fit. Poor Clairville! What must have been his feelings? A meeting which he anticipated with such joy, so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness of his grief, for I was lifeless, and did not recover my senses for a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever, which confined me for several months. During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey, and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself, and firm in the hope that he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that, instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He at first believed them to be the wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity, pertinacity, that is a interesting looking word. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at what pertinacity means. Pertinacity. Okay. Kind of a stubborn, determined persistence in sticking to an opinion. Got it. Okay. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He had first believed them to be the wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity in which I continually referred to the same subject persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origin to some uncommon and terrible event. By very slow degrees, and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. I remembered the first time I became capable of observing outward objects with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by fatal passion. Dearest Clerval, exclaimed I, how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study, as you promised yourself, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion. But you will forgive me. Yes, you will repay me entirely, if you do not discompose yourself, but get well as fast as you can, and since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not? I trembled. One subject. What could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dared not even think? Compose yourself, said Clerval, who observed my change of color. I will not mention it if it agitates you, but your father and cousin would be very happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you have been, and are uneasy at your long silence. Is that all, my dear Henry? How could you suppose that my first thought would not be towards those dear, dear friends whom I love, and who are so deserving of my love? If this is your present temper, my friend, you will perhaps be glad to see a letter that has been lying here some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe. A letter from Elizabeth. Interesting. Here, I got it. My seat is slowly shrinking once again, as I have a desk chair that likes to bring me down. Chapter 6. Clerval then put the following letter into my hands. It was from my own Elizabeth. My dearest cousin, you have been very ill, and even the constant letters of dear kind Henry are not sufficient to reassure me on your account. You are forbidden to write, to hold a pen, yet one word from you, dear Victor, is necessary to calm our apprehensions. For a long time I have thought that each post would bring this line, and my persuasions have restrained my uncle from undertaking a journey to Ingolstadt. I have prevented his encountering the inconveniences and perhaps dangers of so long a journey, yet how often have I regretted not being able to perform it myself. I figured to myself that the task of attending on your sickbed has devolved on some mercenary old nurse, who could never guess your wishes, nor minister to them with the care and affection of your poor cousin. Yet that is over now. Clerval writes that indeed you are getting better. I eagerly hope that you will confirm this intelligence soon in your own handwriting. Get well, and return to us. You will find a happy, cheerful home, and friends who love you dearly. Your father's health is vigorous, and he asks but to see you, but to be assured that you are well, and not a care will ever cloud his benevolent countenance. How pleased you would be to remark the improvement of our Ernest. He is now 16, and full of activity and spirit. He is desirous to be a true Swiss, and to enter into foreign service, but we cannot part with him, at least until his elder brother return to us. My uncle is not pleased with the idea of a military career in a distant country, but Ernest never had your powers of application. He looks upon study as an odious fetter. His time is spent in the open air, climbing the hills or rowing on the lake. I fear that he will become an idler, unless we yield that point, and permit him to enter on the profession which he has selected. Little alteration except the growth of our dear children has taken place since you left us. The blue lake and the snow-clad mountains, they never change. And yet I think our placid home and our contented hearts are regulated by the same immutable laws. My trifling occupations take up my time and amuse me, and I am rewarded for any exertions by seeing none but happy, kind faces around me. Since you left us, but one change has taken place in our little household. Do you remember on what occasion Justine Moritz entered our family? Probably you do not. I will relate her history, therefore, in a few words. Madame Moritz, her mother, was a widow with 4 children, of whom Justine was the third. This girl had always been the favorite of her father, but, through a strange perversity, her mother could not endure her, and after the death of M. Moritz, treated her very ill. My aunt observed this, and when Justine was 12 years of age, prevailed on her mother to allow her to live at our house. The republican institutions of our country have produced simpler and happier manners than those which prevail in the great monarchies that surround it. Hence, there is less distinction between the several classes of its inhabitants, and the lower orders being neither so poor nor so despised, and their manners are more refined and moral. A servant in Geneva does not mean the same thing as a servant in France and England. Justine, thus received in our family, learned the duties of a servant, a condition which, in our fortunate country, does not include the idea of ignorance, and a sacrifice of the dignity of a human being. Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours, and I recollect you once remarked that if you were in ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it, for the same reason that Ariosto gives concerning the beauty of Angelica. Hold on. Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours, and I recollect you once remarked that if you were in an ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it, for the same reason that Ariosto gives concerning the beauty of Angelica. She looked so frank-hearted and happy. Ariosto gives concerning the beauty of Angelica. I don't know this reference. Let's take a look. 21, Ariosto, Angelica, 21. Okay. 21. The Beauty of Angelica, heroine of Ariosto's Orlando Furioso from 1516. I do not know that. Interesting. Kind of put that in the back of the mind, maybe. I'm curious. My aunt conceived a great attachment for her, by which she... Also, hold on. Justine. I don't recall that being mentioned before, because all Victor talked about was Elizabeth and how precious she was. Did I miss? I mean, I could just go back through the video and see the videos and see, but I was curious. This Justine. It's kind of the same situation brought back in. She's kind of the same as Elizabeth and also as precious to Victor. I'm not entirely sure what's going on, but it could just be that Victor himself did not narrate reliably in that manner. This benefit was fully repaid. Justine was the most grateful little creature in the world. I do not mean that she made any professions. I never heard one pass her lips, but you could see by her eyes that she almost adored her protectress. Although her disposition was gay and in many respects inconsiderate, yet she paid the greatest attention to every gesture of my aunt. She thought her the model of all excellence and endeavored to imitate her phraseology and manners, so that even now she often reminds me of her. When my dearest aunt died, everyone was too much occupied in their own grief to notice poor Justine, who had attended her illness with the most anxious affection. Poor Justine was very ill, but other trials were reserved for her. One by one, her brothers and sister died, and her mother, with the exception of her neglected daughter, was left childless. The conscience of the woman was troubled, and she began to think that the deaths of her favorites were a judgment from heaven to chastise her partiality. She was a Roman Catholic, and I believe her confessor confirmed the idea which she had conceived. Accordingly, a few months after your departure for Ingolstadt, Justine was called home by her repentant mother. Poor girl! She wept when she quitted our house. She was much altered since the death of my aunt. Grief had given softness and a winning mildness to her manners, which had before been remarkable for vivacity. Nor was her residence at her mother's house of nature to restore her gaiety. The poor woman was very vacillating in her repentance. She sometimes begged Justine to forgive a unkindness, but much oftener accused her of having caused the deaths of her brothers and sister. Perpetual fretting, at length, threw Madame Moritz into a decline, which at first increased her irritability, but she is now at peace forever. She died on the first approach of cold weather. At the beginning of this last winter, Justine has returned to us, and I assure you I love her tenderly. She is very clever and gentle, and extremely pretty. As I mentioned before, her mien and her expressions continually remind me of my dear aunt. I must say also a few words to you, my dear cousin, of little darling William. I wish you could see him. He is very tall of his age. Oh my goodness. Gotta turn the phone notifications off. I must say also a few words to you, my dear cousin, of little darling William. I wish you could see him. He is very tall of his age, with sweet laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, 2 little dimples appear on each cheek. which are rosy with health. He has already had one or two little wives, but Louisa Byron is his favorite, a pretty little girl of 5 years of age. Wives. Oh, that's italicized. Okay, so she's probably being a bit silly. I'm like, wives? Wow. But Louisa Byron is his favorite, a pretty little girl of 5 years of age. Now, dear Victor, I dare say you wish to be indulged in a little gossip concerning the good people of Geneva. The pretty Miss Mansfield has already received the congratulatory visits on her approaching marriage with a young Englishman, John Melbourne, Esquire. Her ugly sister Manon married M. Dollivard, the rich banker, last autumn. Your favorite schoolfellow, Louis Manoir, has suffered misfortune since the departure of Clairvaux from Geneva, but he's already recovered his spirits and is reported to be at the point of marrying a very lively, pretty Frenchwoman, Madame Tavernier. She is a widow and much older than Manoir, but she is very much admired and a favorite with everybody. I have written myself into better spirits, dear cousin, but my anxiety returns upon me as I conclude. Write, dearest Victor. One line, one word will be a blessing to us. 10,000 thanks to Henry for his kindness, his affection, and his many letters. We are sincerely grateful. Adieu, my cousin. Take care of yourself, and, I entreat you, write. Elizabeth Lavenza, Geneva, March 18th, 17 ought. Dear, dear Elizabeth, I exclaimed, when I had read her letter. I will write instantly, and relieve them from the anxiety they must feel. I wrote, and this exertion greatly fatigued me, but my convalescence had commenced, and proceeded regularly. In another fortnight I was able to leave my chamber. One of my first duties on my recovery was to introduce Clairvaux to the several professors of the university. In doing this, I underwent a kind of rough usage, ill-befitting the wounds that my mind had sustained. Ever since that fatal night, the end of my labors, and the beginning of my misfortunes, I had conceived a violent antipathy even to the name of natural philosophy. When I was otherwise quite restored to health, the sight of a chemical instrument would renew all the agony of my nervous symptoms. Henry saw this, and had removed all my apparatus from my view. He had also changed my apartment, for he perceived that I had acquired a dislike for the room which had previously been my laboratory. But these cares of Clairvaux were made of no avail when I visited the professors. M. Waldman inflicted torture when he praised, with kindness and warmth, the astonishing progress I had made in the sciences. He soon perceived that I disliked the subject, but not guessing the real cause, he attributed my feelings to modesty, and changed the subject from my improvement to the science itself, with a desire, as I evidently saw, of drawing me out. What could I do? He meant to please, and he tormented me. I felt as if he had placed carefully one by one in my view those instruments which were to be afterwards used in putting me to a slow and cruel death. I writhed under his words, yet dared not exhibit the pain I felt. Clairvaux, whose eyes and feelings were always quick in discerning the sensations of others, declined the subject, alleging in excuse his total ignorance, and the conversation took a more general turn. I thanked my friend from my heart, but I did not speak. I saw plainly that he was surprised, but he never attempted to draw my secret from me, and although I loved him with a mixture of affection and reverence that knew no bounds, yet I could never persuade myself to confide in him. That event, which was so often present to my recollection, but which I feared the detail to another would only impress more deeply. M. Krempe was not equally docile, and in my condition at the time of almost insupportable sensitiveness, his harsh, blunt encomiums. Well, let's take a moment there. I am not opposed to not understanding a word. Encomiums. Oh no, encomiums. A speech or piece of writing that praises someone or something highly. Really? Encomium. Encomium. All right. M. Krempe was not equally docile, and in my condition at the time of almost insupportable sensitiveness, his harsh, blunt encomiums gave me even more pain than the benevolent approbation of M. Waldman. D-N. Darn the fella! Cried he. Why, M. Clerval, I assure you that he has outstripped us all. Ay, stare if you please, but it's nevertheless true. A youngster who, but a few years ago, believed in Cornelius Agrippa as firmly as in the gospel, has now set himself at the head of the university. And if he's not soon pulled down, we shall all be out of countenance. Ay, continued he, observing my face expressive of suffering. M. Frankenstein is modest, an excellent quality in a young man. Young men should be diffident in themselves, you know, M. Clerval. I was myself when young, but that wears out in a very short time. M. Krempe had now commenced a eulogy on himself, which happily turned the conversation from a subject that was so annoying to me. Clerval had never sympathized in my tastes for natural science, and his literary pursuits differed wholly from which had occupied me. He came to the university with the design of making himself a complete master of the Oriental languages, as thus he should open a field for the plan of life he had marked out for himself. Resolved to pursue no inglorious career, he turned his eyes towards the East, as affording scope for his spirit of enterprise. The Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit languages engaged his attention, and I was easily induced to enter on the same studies. Idleness had never been irksome to me. Idleness had ever been irksome to me, and now that I wished to fly from reflection and hated my former studies, I felt great relief in being the fellow pupil with my friend, and found not only instruction, but consolation in the works of the Orientalists. I did not, like him, attempt a critical knowledge of their dialects, for I did not contemplate making any other use of them than temporary amusement. I read merely to understand their meaning, and they well repaid my labors. Their melancholy is soothing, their joy elevating, to a degree I never experienced in studying the authors of any other country. When you read their writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun, and a garden of roses, in the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, and the fire that consumes your own heart. How different from the manly and heroical poetry of Greece and Rome! Summer passed away in these occupations, and my return to Geneva was fixed for the latter end of autumn. But being delayed by several accidents, winter and snow arrived, the roads were deemed impassable, and my journey was retarded until the ensuing spring. I felt this delay very bitterly, for I longed to see my native town and my beloved friends. My return had only been delayed so long from an unwillingness to leave Clerval in a strange place, before he had become acquainted with any of its inhabitants. The winter, however, was spent cheerfully, and although the spring was uncommonly late when it came, its beauty compensated for its dilatoriness. I should be familiar with that word. Dilatoriness. Nope, that's not how you spell it. No, not dilatoriness, right? Dilatoriness. Is the quality or state of being slow, tardy, or prone to delaying things. That could describe me. At times. Wow. Let's back it up. The winter, however, was spent cheerfully, and although the spring was uncommonly late, when it came, its beauty compensated for its dilatoriness. The month of May had already commenced, and I expected the latter words, man. The month of May had already commenced, and I expected a letter daily which was to fix the date of my departure. When Henry proposed a pedestrian tour in the environs of Ingolstadt, that I might bid a personal farewell to the country I had so long inhabited, I acceded with pleasure to this proposition. I was fond of exercise, and Clerval had always been my favorite companion in the rambles of this nature that I had taken among the scenes of my native country. We passed a fortnight in these perambulations. Perambulations. I mean, through context, I kind of get what it means. I am interested in this word. Perambulation. Really? The act of walking around, surveying land, or touring. In English law, it's... Hold on a second. Perambulation. The act of walking around surveying land or touring. In English law, its historical meaning is to establish the bounds of a municipality by walking around it. So it's kind of getting like a lay of the land. Like, okay, all right. So then, like as an example, when I first moved to Chicago and kind of placed myself in an apartment, I kind of spent the time touring my neighborhood, kind of getting the sense of the bounds. That's interesting. Perambulation. What a fun word. Perambulation. That's fun to say. We passed a fortnight in these perambulations. My health and spirits had long been restored, and they gained additional strength from the salubrious air I breathed. I need to stop a second. I kind of love the vocabulary of this, and maybe it's just a testament to how little I have read in my time. That reading more, reading from classical literature, reading a deeper library of books gives you new words. And there are some pleasure in excavating new words out of a text. Yes. We passed a fortnight in these perambulations. My health and spirits had long been restored, and they gained additional strength from the salubrious air I breathed, the natural incidents of our progress, and the conversation of my friend. Study had therefore secluded me from the intercourse of my fellow creatures, and rendered me unsocial. But Clerval called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature, and the cheerful faces of children. Excellent friend! How sincerely did you love me and endeavor to elevate my mind until it was on level with your own. A selfish pursuit had cramped and narrowed me until your gentleness and affection warmed and opened my senses. I became the same happy creature who, a few years ago, loved and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. When happy, inanimate nature had the power of bestowing on me the most delightful sensations. I became the same happy creature who, a few years ago, loved and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. When happy, inanimate nature had the power of bestowing upon me the most delightful sensations. A serene sky and verdant fields filled me with ecstasy. The present season was indeed divine. The flowers of spring bloomed in the hedges, while those of summer were already in the bud. I was undisturbed by thoughts which during the preceding year had pressed upon me, notwithstanding my endeavors to throw them off with invincible burden. Henry rejoiced in my gaiety, and sincerely sympathized in my feelings. He exerted himself to amuse me, while he expressed the sensations that filled his soul. The resources of his mind on this occasion were truly astonishing. His conversation was full of imagination, and very often in imitation of the Persian and Arabic writers. He invented tales of wonderful fancy and passion. At other times he repeated my favorite poems, or drew me out into arguments, which he supported with great ingenuity. We returned to our college on Sunday afternoon. The peasants were dancing, and everyone we met appeared gay and happy. My own spirits were high, and I bounded along with feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity. Okay, so we're ending here on chapter 6, and next time will be chapter 7. Seems like he's going to be returning home to his laboratory with a letter from his father. Interesting. I'm excited. I'm curious to see where this goes. This was an interesting section to read through in the creation of the monster, and it's almost written as like an expulsion. This kind of spasm of creation, this dark creation, this spasm, and it seems to be like this thing that just kind of happens and bursts forth, and then in its completion is a horrible sight, a horrible thing, this vile, there's almost like a turn. I mean, you see that in the media, or the adaptations of it in the movies, even the Universal. When he creates this thing, it's alive, and it's horrible. And he freaks out. This is almost a disgust. Like, almost a perversion of the the cycle of life in terms of expending self and then developing life. It's all protracted, like it's all compacted so much, and because it's not the natural way, there's just almost this disgust in there. I don't know. It's I'm really fascinated by where this is going. I mean, I kind of have a sense of things. The framing story is, Victor's on this ship in the far north. He's chasing the thing, this monster. This monster has left. We don't know where it is. And this creation moment, this like defining moment in the story is this dark and horrible thing. And normally in childbirth, it's actually a very transcendent thing. A holy emotional wave hits you, and there's this just you're overwhelmed, but lifted. There's like this beauty and hope and new life, and this new life creates in Frankenstein dread and despair. He faints. He dies in a way. He doesn't die, but like he dies to himself, and wholly has to remove himself from his studies to literature, to English, to different languages, like to his friend. He pulls him from hell, almost. I don't know. I'm loving this story quite a lot. There's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. The vocabulary is very good. I like it. The turns of phrase are great, and the two defining moments, like there's the death of Victor's mother, and that was such a hard moment to read last time, and the creation of the monster here was equally hard in a different way, and very interesting. I'm a rambly kind of mess because I'm still thinking through this. I have a lot more to think about in this, and I hope you do too as we continue to read this. We are sitting at, I should have given us the page. Going forward, next time we'll be at page 69. We are at about almost the halfway point. This will be slightly longer. I don't predict we're going to get done before Halloween, unless through some miracle I can actually stream every day. It's not out of the pale, but I don't know. So anyways, I have the rest of the day to get to. Got work to do. As if I could work well with all this on the mind. Like, goodness. A great story. I hope you, if you're watching this, I hope you read along. I hope you get the book. It doesn't even have to match with this edition. It might not even be possible to get this edition, but I hope you match it along and read along. It's great. It's great to read, and it's kind of been everything I've hoped for and more, which is a good feeling when you have a high expectation and you're met with it. Mary Shelley's a really good writer, if I may put it in such an understated way. Anyways, I gotta go. I will see you all later, and yeah, be well. Let me see where this button is to shut this whole thing off. Where'd it go? Right over here.